say other things. What about people who say things like, on October the 7th, F Israel, I'm cleaning up the language here, F Israel, the government and its military, are you ready for your downfall? People who say things like F Israel and any Jew who supports Israel. May your conscience haunt your dreams until your last breath. Palestine will be free one day. F apartheid Israel and is any Israeli. This is pretty extreme rhetoric, don't you think?
Senator, I do, and I think there is a distinction between espousing or endorsing terrorist ideology and speech that is odious, that does not rise to that level.
Fair enough. This person works for you. This is Nuja Ali, an employee of the Department of Homeland Security, who posted these comments on October the 7th. That's not all she posted. She also posted this graphic. Now, this is a fake graphic, I want to be clear, but I think we understand it. This is a paraglider, a Hamas paraglider, depicted here with a machine gun flying into Israel. She posted it under her online alias with the celebratory Free Palestine. Mr. Secretary, what's going on here? Is this typical of people who work at DHS? This is an asylum and immigration officer who is posting these, frankly, pro-genocidal slogans and images on the day that Israelis are being slaughtered in their beds. What have you done about this?
4 things I'd like to say to you. Number one, your question to suggest that that is emblematic of the men and women of the Department of Homeland Security is despicable.
I'm sorry, what have you done? This person works for the Department of Homeland Security. Have you fired her?
That was one of 4 answers.
Have you fired her?
One.
Have you fired her? Don't come to this hearing room when Israel has been invaded and Jewish students are barricaded in libraries in this country and cannot be escorted out because they are threatened for their lives. You have employees who are celebrating genocide, and you are saying it's despicable for me to ask the question? Has she been fired?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Secretary.
After the consumption of Senator Hawley's time, I'd like to speak.
Has she been fired?
Because I will
We
not
would like an answer. Would you?
Because I will not be given the opportunity.
Has she been fired?
So that individual has been placed on administrative leave.
So she's not been fired.
Number two.
Why has she not been fired?
Number two, the individual was hired in 2019.
Why has she not been fired?
Number three, I cannot speak to an ongoing personnel matter.
Why has this person not been fired? Your answer is you can't speak to it? This isn't sufficient to fire her?
I am not in a position to speak to an ongoing personnel matter.
This isn't sufficient to fire her? That's what you're telling me?
That is not what I'm saying.
But she's still on your payroll as we sit here today.
That is not what I'm saying.
She's still on your payroll as we sit here today.
Senator?
How many cases? She was an asylum and immigration officer. How many cases did she adjudicate?
Senator, I'm not in a position to speak about an ongoing personnel.
I'm not asking about that. I'm asking you how many cases she adjudicated.
My answer remains.
Did she adjudicate any cases involving Israelis seeking asylum in this country?
Same answer.
Well, let me just point you to what else she posted on social media, where she drew attention to the fact that she is an immigration and asylum officer. Hashtag immigrants, hashtag asylum seekers, hashtag Palestine, hashtag refugees welcome. This is on her LinkedIn post where she has her professional affiliation posted. So I think the American people deserve to know, has she admitted, contrary to law, individuals who should not be in this country or denied Jewish refugees whose genocide she's advocating asylum that they deserve?
Same answer.
You're not going to tell us what this person's done? Are you conducting a review of her cases at least?
Senator, as I have said over and over again, I cannot speak to an ongoing.
You said that you will not.
matter.
I can't believe that you would come to this committee knowing this. You know about this. I've written to you about it. You know all about it. And you come here unwilling to answer and suggest that it is wrong of me to ask you the question. Quite frankly, Mr. Secretary, I think that your performance is despicable. And I think the fact that you are not willing to provide answers to this committee is absolutely atrocious.
Mr. Chairman, may I?
Like, if you'd like to have a minute to respond, you are
Oh,
welcome to.
I would, and I'm not sure I'll limit it to 60 seconds.
That's fine.
Number one, what I found despicable is the implication that this language, tremendously odious, actually it could be emblematic of the sentiments of the 260,000 men and women of the Department of Homeland Security. Number one. Number two, Senator Hawley takes an adversarial approach to me in this question, and perhaps he doesn't know my own background. Perhaps he does not know that I am the child of a Holocaust survivor. Perhaps he does not know that my mother lost almost all her family at the hands of the Nazis. And so I find his adversarial tone to be entirely misplaced. I find it to be disrespectful of me and my heritage, and I do not expect an apology, but I did want to say what I just articulated. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I just respond since he has referenced me personally?
Senator Hawley, we need to move on. Senator Romney, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to spend most of my time looking at the threat against Jewish citizens and against Muslim citizens as well, and get a sense of what we can do to try and reduce the degree of violence and threat towards these individuals. But before I do, I just want to turn back to the chart that was put up by Senator Johnson early on. If you could put that up again, or just hold it up again. I find that so alarming and so revealing that it's a little stunning. This is the point, Secretary Mayorkas, when you came into office. And if that were my record, I would resign in shame, or I would have fashioned a piece of legislation designed to solve that problem and worked like crazy to get it passed. I don't think you've done either one of those things. You said several times to Senator Langford, for instance, that the asylum system is broken and we need to fix the asylum system. But you've been there 3 years. I don't know that you proposed legislation to fix the asylum system that would change what you're seeing here. Am I wrong? Have you proposed legislation that would fix asylum?
We have quite a number of suggestions with respect to how to reform the asylum system, Senator Romney, and I'm very eager to work with you to achieve
In what way?
those.
What if you had one thing you could do about fixing the asylum system that you think would bring that back to historic levels? What would it be?
Well, first of all, Senator, we're dealing with an unprecedented level of migration in the hemisphere, and that cannot be forgotten in the discussion of what reform is needed and what we are experiencing.
Yes, and what led to that unprecedented level of immigration illegally into the country happens to coincide with your becoming Secretary of the Department that's responsible for border security and President Biden becoming president. The key factor that's changed here is your administration. And so, again, I don't know how you can continue to come before this committee with that record without saying this is what has to be done. Now, I'm gonna turn instead to the topic which I think is most pertinent right now with regards to protecting our Jewish citizens. And I look to Commissioner Wray, Director Wray at the FBI, and ask, of the attacks of a religious nature, you said some 60% are directed towards Jews in this country. Is that right?
I did, and that's before, those are estimates or statistics that are before this conflict began.
Oh, so it's probably gone up since then.
I would expect that, but we don't have good numbers yet because it's so fresh. But I think that the point that I was trying to make there, which I really think Americans need to understand, is how wildly disproportionate, if you could ever use a word like proportionate in something like this, that is. 2.4% of the American public, 60% of religious-based hate crimes. They're getting it from racially and ethnically motivated violent extremists, ISIS-inspired violent extremists, foreign terrorist organizations, whether they be Sunni like Al-Qaeda or ISIS, or Shia like Hezbollah. And so this is a group that has the outrageous distinction of being uniquely targeted, and they need our help.
What proportion of these hate crimes has been directed towards Muslims, for instance? If 60% were towards Jews, what percent towards Muslims?
I don't have that percentage, but it's obviously quite a bit smaller than 60% by definition. But.
And you attribute that attack on Jews to these hate groups, I presume, these terrorist groups and hate groups that focus on Jews. Is that right?
Well, yes, but of course, they cover the waterfront, right. And that's the point that I'm trying to make. You know, they unfortunately have the distinction of being targeted by every group.
How do they communicate their directions to attack? What's their vehicle for getting that out? Certainly not in the New York Times and not on NBC. How do they get their message out?
Well, social media plays a huge part of it, just like it does messaging on almost everything these days.
Can you take action, or do you take action to try and eliminate, to the extent possible, or reduce the access these groups have through social media? Is there a way of doing that, or is it like, no, there's so many different dark web and other vehicles that their message gets out whether or not we try and interdict it?
There are instances where foreign terrorist activity in the world of propaganda crosses into the material support to terrorism, to a foreign terrorist organization space. But now you're getting into a legal area that I'm not the expert on. What we really need is people, eyes and ears in the community, people letting us know when they see something of concern, so that law enforcement can take appropriate action. And that's why we spend so much time engaged in outreach to state and local law enforcement as a force multiplier, to the faith-based community as a force multiplier in effect, and to the private sector. People sometimes overlook that piece, but some guy goes into Home Depot and wants to buy a bunch of ball bearings and fertilizer and doesn't seem to know anything about what either one could be used for. We want the guy in Home Depot calling law enforcement saying something's off.
Well, I deeply appreciate the work that your 37,000 employees of the FBI do to try and keep our homeland safe, and have done so remarkably well despite this level of threat. I would at the same time look to see if there's not something we can do. I understand we don't want to interdict constitutionally protected speech, but what is constitutionally protected speech? Certainly, foreign agents don't have constitutionally protected speech because they're not subject to our Constitution. I presume bots don't have constitutionally protected speech. American citizens do. But even then, citizens offer various forms of hate. And I don't know how you make the assessment of how you reduce the communication of hate across our social media that's clearly leading to the level of attacks that are being perpetrated against people of faith, and particularly Jews.
Well, there is a role for different parts of society in dealing with the issue. Where the FBI fits in is dealing with violence and threats of violence. And when it crosses into that line, it doesn't matter what you're ticked off about or who you're ticked off at. That's a line you don't get to cross in our system, and that's where the FBI kicks into action.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you, Senator Romney. Senator Blumenthal for your questions.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, all of you, for being here today. Thanks for your work on behalf of our country, and to the many, many men and women who work in each of your departments, whom many of them I've come to know. The threat of violent extremism, Director Wray, is not new after October 7th. In fact, I think the intelligence community has warned repeatedly that the most persistent and lethal threat to our internal security is, in fact, violent extremism. And I accept that we need more eyes and ears. We need more vigilance. If you see something, say something. But would there be additional legal tools that would be helpful to you in pursuing hate crimes, which are not speech, they are not constitutionally protected, they involve violence, they involve physical threats or results? Are there additional legislative tools that we could give you?
Well, certainly we need the resources to address the issues. None of the threats that I described in my opening statement or in my questions here today are threats that I would say are fading away. They are all significant and they require attention. And everywhere I go, someone's got very good ideas about things the FBI should do more of. It's not very many responsible ideas of things that we can, at scale, do less of.
Well, let me ask you specifically, the nonprofit security grant program, it's about $300 million. Last year, the president proposed increasing it by $200 million. That seems to me a fraction of what is necessary. We need to spend $1 billion on it. I'm seeing in Connecticut, again and again and again, synagogues, mosques, churches, community centers spending scarce resources to hire security guards. Shouldn't that be a matter for the federal government to help prevent threats of that kind?
Well, now you're, of course, asking about grant programs, which have a very important role here. The FBI is not a grant-making agency, but the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security both, and maybe some other agencies, would have a place for that, and those do help.
Do you think we should increase that kind of investment? Obviously, it's prevention, but you're in a much better position, especially in terms of resource, to conserve your efforts if violence is prevented.
Well, I know that I can only speak from the FBI's end. Obviously, we spend an awful lot of time at the national level and at each one of our field offices engaged with communities of faith and the various national associations at the national level. And security is, of course, the #1 topic we're engaged with them on, and they all need more help.
Well, I'd appreciate your support for increasing that amount, as well as Secretary Mayorkas. Let me ask you, Mr. Secretary, enforcement of sanctions against Iran. Department of Homeland Security has a central role. Senator Ernst and I are proposing bipartisan legislation to provide a fund within the Department of Homeland Security for better enforcement, because your agents around the world, among many other duties, are responsible for investigating Iran's violations of sanctions that are there because Iran's using the revenue from those illicit oil sales to fund Hamas. Hamas wouldn't exist, it wouldn't be a threat, it couldn't have attacked on October 7th without resources provided by Iran, which in turn derived from those oil sales. Shouldn't we provide you with more resources to enforce those sanctions?
Senator, we would welcome the additional resources for Homeland Security investigations. I very much look forward to working with you on that legislation. And our personnel do tremendous work in HSI, along with our federal partners, to enforce our sanctions regime and hold those who seek to circumvent it accountable.
Thank you. Ms. Abizaid, you seem to have escaped a good deal of controversy today, and I'm not about to embroil you in it, but you did make in your testimony a very, I think, important observation, and I'm going to quote it. Over the last several years, Iran has plotted against the United States, other Western interests, and Iranian dissidents more aggressively than they have at any time since the 1980s. And you go on. Can you provide us specific instances since October 7th? And are you concerned about the threat of possible Iranian-sponsored terrorism? Obviously, they don't send Iranian nationals somewhere. They use their proxies, just as they use Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, the jihadists. Are there reasons for concern in the homeland?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question and for including me in the discussion here today. I would say that Iran is the poster child for state sponsor of terrorism. It has long pursued terrorist proxy relationships. It has long pursued international operations, including especially over the last several years, not just focused on former government officials that it considers responsible for Qasem Soleimani's assassination, but also against Israeli interests and other interests worldwide. We've seen this pretty persistently. I will say that stands in contrast to what we've seen since October 7th. At this current moment, I would not have any indications of an Iranian threat inside the United States that should be of concern. That said, Iran has a significant escalatory capability that if it intended to be escalatory in this current conflict, we should be very concerned. And so the work that Director Wray has talked about, the work that we collaborate on in trying to counter Iranian-sponsored terrorist attacks all over the world is critically important for us to stay vigilant on in this current environment.
Thank you. I'd like to pursue that line of questioning with you. I don't have time today because my time has expired. And I also will submit for the record a question on artificial intelligence. Senator Hawley and I have a framework. The President announced one yesterday. I think your agencies have a critical role to play. And let me just conclude on the point that Director Abizaid raised about potential foreign attacks. We still, in my view, have failed to hold accountable for the attack on 9/11 in support of the families that have sued Saudi Arabia. There is still information that the FBI could provide. I have had various meetings with your personnel, Director Wray, and they have sought to be cooperative, and we're going to pursue those questions. I just wanted you to know that we're continuing to focus on it. Your folks are engaged with us, and I hope we reach a success.